Welcome all you ghosts and ghoulies to Conjuring Canvases, the show where spooky art is created and terrifying tales are told. My name is Learn the Conjurer and I am your host. Our show is inspired by Robert Welsh's Ghost Stories and Makeup Mondays. I highly recommend his channel, especially if you love hearing spooky stories and you love makeup. I have a lot of inspiration that comes from him, so I highly recommend you check him out. And if you want that link, check the show description. Today's episode takes us all the way back to the days of sleepovers, ghosts and ghoulies, back when your friends used to dare you to go into a dark bathroom and say a certain person's name 3 times. Or was it 13 times? Either way, we're summoning her today in this episode, and that lady is Bloody Mary. So because we're doing the mirror baddie herself, I decided to dress as my rendition of Bloody Mary. Now you might be wondering, ghosties, why in the world did Bloody Mary not have this part of her costume bloodied? I'm here to tell you, I don't have an answer. Everyone's allowed to mess up, right guys? Well, at least the rest of me looks pretty bloody and sparkly. I even got a little bit of feather blood in my hair, and of course, I've got some mirror-tastic nails as well. If you want to see the entirety of the look, make sure to follow us on Instagram at Conjuring Canvases. It should be noted by all the ghosts and ghoulies watching that I am not an expert in anything I'm talking about, nor am I an expert in art. I really am just doing this for fun because I love all things spooky and creepy, and I have a feeling you do too. So, I hope you enjoy everything that we bring together in this episode. But if you are someone who has a spooky tale or you have an idea for a future episode, please contact us at conjuringcanvases@gmail.com. Some of you might notice that a certain person from the first episode is still chilling in the back over here. That is the Hatman painting. I decided to go and display the paintings that have already been done in previous episodes so that you, the viewers, can see just all of them together in their own spooky house. However, if you are looking to support the show and support me, I do have an Etsy store that you are able to go ahead and purchase this one-of-a-kind art. I can at least somewhat guarantee that they're not haunted. Either way, ghosties and ghoulies, I so appreciate your support in watching, liking, and making sure that you're still staying engaged in all of our spooky fun. Before each episode, I like to have a little segment called Spooky Shout Out, where I shout out a small business, a really cool product, or just an awesome creepy thing that I think you'll enjoy. Today's episode goes out to a very dear friend of mine named Whom It May Concern. Her shop is all things to do with Halloween goodness. If you're into some really cool 90s looking candles and nostalgia from your childhood past, I highly recommend checking out her store. You can find her on Instagram at Whom It May Concern. And of course, when you find her, make sure you give her a like and a follow. All right, let's go ahead and get this very creepy episode started. I got the paints laid out, and you might have noticed, ghosts and ghoulies, that this is very different from the first episode where all I had was a sketched outline on a canvas. I decided that this time I wanted to go and do a black outline for the entirety of the canvas, not only because I thought that it would be easier for you to see, but also I figured that it might even add to the spooky factor. So basically anybody who has ever been invited to a sleepover before knows all about Bloody Mary. But I actually discovered that there are quite a few different origin stories that come from Bloody Mary. You also might be wondering, well, where exactly did she come from? Where did this urban legend start? Well, it just so happens that I found there were several examples from history that depict a form of Bloody Mary. So the first resource that I remember finding was one that talked about Mary, the Queen Regent, who was the daughter of Henry VIII. So the Tudors era. Poor Mary, she really had just a really rough hand dealt to her. I mean, most women in that time did. Her life was pretty difficult, considering the fact that first and foremost, she was made illegitimate for a while because she was the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, who was Henry VIII's first wife. But then he filed for divorce, which was basically unheard of back in that time, and married Anne Boleyn. And the reason why he divorced her was because Catherine of Aragon could not give him a male living heir. Well, of course, Mary being the first of his children, she was actually taken away from the throne so that she couldn't possibly interfere with Anne Boleyn's daughter, Elizabeth. So, of course, if you've kept up on English history, both Elizabeth and Mary became queens later in their life. But Mary's story is very tragic. As she got older, Mary started to realize that she was having womanly issues. She had a lot of menstrual issues, a lot of period problems. Girl, I get you. I understand that struggle entirely. I know exactly how it feels. You see, Mary ended up being someone who was considered to be pretty successful within her royal reign. She still managed to marry someone, but by the time that she married someone, she was pregnant with her first child at age 37. Now, Mary ended up going through the same exact symptoms that a woman goes through when they are pregnant. So, in other words, her belly swelled, her breasts enlarged. It was very obvious that she was pregnant to everyone else. But by the time that her due date came, she never ended up giving birth. And nothing ever even happened. So in Mary's case, Mary was considered to be someone who suffered in that time from what's called phantom pregnancy. So basically what happens in that is that the body tricks the mother that she is in fact pregnant when she is not. So the interesting thing about that is that, of course, back in those days, they didn't have science and modern medicine, so they had no way to tell that. So back then, rumors started spreading about Mary, saying that she was a liar, trying to make it so that she was a legitimate queen who could produce a legitimate male heir. Now, sadly, she ended up experiencing several miscarriages after that. And of course, it's also sad because she spent a lot of her life in exile and in solidarity. She wasn't even allowed to see her own mother because of her father back when she was younger and because of that divorce. Now, at the same time when she was pregnant, her country was at war with the Catholics and the Protestants. Mary was very, very Catholic. Now, unfortunately, back in those days, war was raging over religion. So if you did not believe in the common religion, oftentimes you were either jailed or executed. And what Mary was responsible for was ordering the deaths of thousands of Protestants throughout her country. Hence, she was given the name Bloody Mary. I feel bad for Queen Mary, I do indeed. However, it's clear that she was very tormented. Very tormented. Now, as Mary continued on with her life, she never ended up happy. She never was able to bear any children, and because of that, she became very depressed and died in her 40s. So, very, very sad. A lot of people say that the legend of Bloody Mary comes from her, not only because back in those days in the 1500s she was dubbed the Bloody Mary, but also because she was known to never have children, and she was also known to have problems with her menstrual cycle. I'm not really liking how dark this is, so I'm going to add a little bit more blue, and then I'm going to tell you more about the second origin story. There's an origin of Bloody Mary that comes from the 1800s, and this talks about being in a plague in America. Really? I feel very seen. What ended up happening in this particular tale was that the yellow fever pandemic was spreading throughout the world, and in particular, the story does come from America. In the 1800s, there was a girl named Mary whose family thought that she succumbed to yellow fever and that she had died. Now, back in those days, what they ended up doing with you was that with yellow fever and with other similar diseases, what would happen to your body you would kind of go into a coma, per se. Now, the coma would last for a couple weeks, sometimes your whole life. Either way, you oftentimes were undetermined if you were really living or dead. It's amazing how modern science has really changed. Now, in Mary's case, when she died, she didn't actually die. She was in a coma. Her family buried her. But back in those days, because they were never truly sure if their loved one was dead or alive, they used to put a bell on the outside of the grave, typically at the top of the gravestone. And attached to the bell was a string. and the string led all the way down inside of the coffin. So basically their answer to that was, if a person was in fact not dead, they would ring the bell, and then that way they would just go ahead and unbury them, and then woo, they're alive, yay, we're happy. Unfortunately, in Mary's case, that did not happen. Mary was actually alive, and her family didn't know this because she was in her coma inside of her grave for 2 whole weeks. When she awoke, she saw the string and rang her bell. Which, can I just say that if we're ever in a world where they say, don't know if you're alive or dead, here's the string, figure it out, I don't want to live on this planet anymore. So Mary rings her bell, and no one hears it. Why? Because her family went on some kind of a trip, a retreat or something, and they didn't know. So they come back and they see that the bell had been tripped, but it was no longer ringing. They exhumed Mary and found that she was now dead, officially, and that there were scratch marks all the way down the back of the coffin. Now, what I think is interesting about these 2 stories so far is I'm more inclined to believe that Queen Mary is a little more legit thus far in what I would think is an origin story. However, the 2 do have some good points, because not only do people say that Bloody Mary is covered in blood even to her menstrual areas, the scratching is also relevant because, of course, what happens with most people who claim that they do Bloody Mary is they claim that they have cuts or scratches all over them afterwards. So it's just very interesting, the parallel of that. The next origin, which I had never heard of before, is about the witch named Mary Worth. Now, this story comes to us from the UK. I couldn't get an exact year, so I want to assume anywhere between the 16 and 1800s is probably around where this story originates. Mary Worth was dubbed a witch. She lived in a very, 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 very small cabin, and she was known to mostly take things like herbs and potions and use them on herself or offer them to the townspeople. Now, I believe what could be is that Mary Worth could have very well had been what is known as a shaman these days, a spiritual healer of some form, someone who essentially puts together natural herbs and elixirs in order to heal people. However, the story goes that Mary Worth was not a nice person, or at least the villagers claim that she was not. They also claimed that around the time that Mary Worth decided to not come around town anymore, or at least when they didn't see her around town anymore, small girls started to go missing throughout the town. Oftentimes, these small girls would be asleep in their beds, and then the next day, their parents would find them gone. Now, that means that these girls would disappear in the dead of night. One little girl claimed that she heard the sounds of singing coming from outside of her bedroom. And so she decided she wanted to follow the singing, so she got up and started walking out of her home. Now, this little girl happened to be a farmer's daughter. The farmer, who happened to be awake, found his daughter making her way outside. And he stopped her, and he could hear the music too. And in the distance, they saw Mary Worth. And of course, Mary Worth began running because they all dubbed her as a witch. She was technically supposed to be found and questioned for the disappearance of these girls. The farmer took it upon himself to shoot her with a silver bullet. I'm sorry, are we on werewolves? We're talking about Bloody Mary, right? Either way, the basic idea of a silver bullet to be used on a witch, silly to me, but what ended up happening was he shot her, but he didn't shoot her fatally. So when she was apprehended, they brought her into the square of town and set her up on a stake. And just before she was burned alive, Mary Worth was quoted to curse all that said her name, and that if you dared to say her name within your reflection, she would come to get you. I would say that that is probably the most accurate depiction of Bloody Mary. Wow. When I learned that, I was amazed, and I also wondered why I had never heard that before. Now, a lot of these urban legends often are taken from many different tales from our history, and usually they're bastardized, right? Usually there's something about them that isn't quite right, or someone takes a detail and makes it a little far-fetched so that people get a little spooked by it. But neither did Queen Mary nor this Mary who died of the Yellow Plague had anything to do with the mirror. This Mary Worth mentioned a reflection. So I would happen to think that I believe Mary Worth is the true origin of Bloody Mary. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, learn, wrap it up. Why are we talking about so many origins when it comes down to Bloody Mary? Well, if you are a viewer and you are from America, like myself, you might have found that Bloody Mary is pretty much the same thing everywhere you go. We all hear that it's the same exact story. You look into a mirror, you go into a dark bathroom, you usually light a candle, you say her name however many times, and boom, she appears and gets you, right? But the funny thing is I found out that Bloody Mary, or at least the origin stories of Bloody Mary that we know today as what we would do when we were kids, wasn't really publicized until the 70s. In 1978, a woman named Janet Langlois published an essay that had all to do with the folklore and the legend of Bloody Mary. Now, she was also the first to dub her as the Mirror Witch, which I think is a pretty accurate way to describe her, I guess, especially if she is supposed to be Mary Worth. I would say that that is pretty accurate. Now, according to Janet's essay, she had already mentioned that by the time the 70s hit, everyone knew about Bloody Mary. But she had said that the ritual in order to do Bloody Mary had to be very specific. The first thing that she talked about was getting into a bathroom rather than in any other room in your home. The reason why was because back then, like today, bathroom mirrors tended to be the largest mirror in your house. Also, the bathroom was oftentimes the smallest room in people's homes, and so the confined spaces really made it perfect for the ritual. Now, what she claims is you're supposed to say Bloody Mary's name 13 times before she appears in the mirror to come scratch her face off or scratch her eyes out or scratch the living shit out of you, is basically the premise of that. She added to her essay, which I'd never heard of this before in my life, Ghosties and Ghoulies, and it gave me a real chill. She had mentioned that if instead of saying Bloody Mary, you say Hell Mary 7 times in the same fashion. You're in a bathroom, it's dark, there's no lights, and you're staring into the mirror. If you say that 7 times, Satan will appear. So I don't know if anyone who is viewing is someone who practices devil worship or practices anything like that, but can I get a confirmation, please? Or, you know, I shouldn't be asking that, should I? As you can see, the legend has really gone through some hoops and ladders since its origin story technically beginning in the 1500s. You're probably wondering, Learn, did you ever do Bloody Mary? Have you ever seen her? I mean, after all, you said yourself that each painting is either based on your actual experiences or your own depictions. Well, I'm here to tell you, Ghosts and Ghoulies, I, like most people who were invited to sleepovers, was forced into doing it. Did I end up completing the ritual? No. I'm sorry, do I look like someone who would be willing to do something like this? I'm gonna tell you this right now. This? Not what I ever want to see. I gotta tell you, I mean, like, I get that most kids that do it, or most of us when we were children, when we did it, it was mostly a way to, like, prove you were braver than everyone else, and prove that she wasn't real, and everybody was just making up stories. But you know, it's funny, Ghosts and Ghoulies, because I thought about it, and most people believe that mirrors in general are portals to other realms. Now, I could believe that. I definitely am someone who has a lot of mirrors in their home, mostly because I just like the way it makes a room open up. But I do not believe in making myself a conduit for a mirror ritual. I just don't think that it's a good idea. I just feel like, you know, when we go to a sleepover, can we just do something else? Can we order a pizza? You know, watch one of those movies that maybe we're not supposed to watch, but, you know, your mom, like, is really cool and gets pay-per-view? Can we just stay up past our bedtime and talk about boys? Can we do anything else? Just anything else. Anything else at all. I swear to God, if they say to pull out a Ouija board, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I don't know what I'm gonna do. The point that I'm trying to make here is that I have never done it before. Will I ever do it? That's a 10-4 no good, buddy. No, never happening. That said, if you have ever done the ritual and you saw something or you didn't see anything, or you know, you know someone who did it, you've got an interesting story, please email me. Email me at conjuringcampuses@gmail.com, thank you. Now, I'm also wanting to, because obviously this is a mirror that I'm currently painting in, I'm wanting to make it so that the inside of the mirror is not as dark as the outside walls, but I do want to kind of elevate a little bit of a shadow element here. So I want it to be not entirely dark, but I want it to be like very obvious. Also love that you can like see that the Hat Man is just hanging out. Just wants to see what's going on. I think that it's time to move on to stories.
This story comes to us from Redditor Deleted. As a young child, I was basically the definition of chicken shit. I used to sleep with my lights on, or fall asleep to the sound of a movie blasting out of my television. I guess all of the fear drained out of me during those years, because at this point, I'm not exactly a person you would call a coward. But I do have my moments. Now to the story. When I was 7 or 8, I started going to my elementary school's summer recreational program. There, I met some of the best people I know. I met a girl there, we'll call her Rebecca, who is to this day my best friend. We all sat in a small corner of the large gymnasium while she told us about Bloody Mary, the lady in the mirror. She told us the basic story about Bloody Mary, who was a woman who lost her child, and if you chant her name while standing in front of a mirror in a dark room, she will appear, etc., etc. After she told us the story, I continued to hear news stories about Bloody Mary from different people throughout that summer. Variations, backstories, and anything to make this story more scary. Being the young, naive child that I was, I believed all of it. At past midnight, I would lay awake in my pitch-black bedroom, contemplating what I would do if Bloody Mary just happened to slip out of the mirror and into my room. One night, I went to bed as usual and tried to sleep, as it was the night before my 9th birthday. I kissed my mom and dad goodnight and proceeded to go to my bedroom and fall asleep with my lights on like always. I slowly fell asleep. I woke up. The room was pitch black. Mom probably came in and shut off the lights or something, but I looked at the illuminated LED alarm clock on my nightstand. 11:59. Great. I have to wait until 12:10 to go to the bathroom, I thought. Even if I did go to the bathroom, I would go in terrified and trying my best to avoid looking in the mirror. I sat there, alone, in the dark, with a full bladder. You know what? I thought, this is ridiculous, Tiffany. You're 9 years old now, and you're still acting like a 2-year-old. Bloody Mary isn't real. I wanted to get over my fear, I really did, thinking that if I went to the bathroom and did the ritual, nothing would happen, and I wouldn't be scared anymore. I grabbed a large candle from my parents' bedroom, tiptoeing quietly so I wouldn't wake them up. I crept down to the living room and grabbed the lighter from the kitchen. I lit the candle, burning myself on my first try, and walked into the bathroom. I set the candle down onto the sink and stared into my lit reflection. Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary. Bloody Mary. Nothing happened. I was relieved. I quickly blew out the candle and slipped back to my bed, smiling. I laid there, staring at the clock. I closed my eyes, But then I realized it was nearly 90 degrees outside in the summer, but my bedroom was cold. I was afraid to open my eyes, but I did. In my doorway was a dark figure of a lady. Looking at her made my insides hurt. I wanted to scream, but I was also afraid of waking up my parents. I simply closed my eyes and tried to imagine puppies, flowers, celebrations that would take place in the afternoon for my birthday. I tried everything. I eventually drifted off to sleep with the feeling that Bloody Mary was watching me. Morning, I woke up, and the sunshine from outside blinded my eyes. I looked into the doorway. Nothing. I went into the bathroom and dared to look in the mirror. There was a cut next to my eyebrow. I changed into my dress for the day, noticing small scratches on my stomach. I ignored them. After that day, I tried not to think about that night. I never told my friends about what happened, and that everything that Rebecca said was real. I'm not afraid of the dark anymore. I even play idiotic games with my friends like the Three Kings or the Midnight Game.
Okay, so, great story. Loved it. If you are a viewer and you know what the Midnight Game is, let me tell you, not a good plan. That's what I'm thinking of doing for a future episode, is covering games that have to do with paranormal entities. A lot of it is insane nightmare fuel. And how the Redditor says, oh, well, I don't ever want to play Bloody Mary ever again. I'll never play it. Oh, but I'll play the Midnight Game. Don't do that. Why are you gonna do that? Please don't do that. Why? Okay, so, like, bless their sweet soul, how they literally are like, oh, well, I'm just gonna stay in my room and the lights are off and I'm scared. I would think that, you know, at least the parent would buy them a nightlight or something, right? Jeez, that's so mean. And you know that, like, your kid is terrified of the dark, but you're, like, gonna wait until they go to sleep and then you go in their room and you shut off everything. Oh, it's so mean. I mean, I commend them for trying to be brave and being like, you know what, if I do this, I'm not going to be scared anymore. And then I'll prove that none of it's real and my friend's wrong and, you know, blah, blah, blah. But clearly, like, of all times, you chose because you had to go to the bathroom and you went to the bathroom, but you didn't do the business? Like, did you pee your bed? I have a lot of follow-up questions, is all I have to say, but I loved the story. And, you know, I think I really liked it as well for the element of it being, having to do with summer camp. I went to summer camp for a lot of my life, Ghosts and Ghoulies. My parents put me there every summer, and I remember having to do a lot of really dumb stuff to appease all my new friends. And, you know, in summer camp we did end up doing Bloody Mary. And that was the one and only time I ever did it. And I said, nope, not gonna do it. And all my friends told me that I was chicken shit and that, you know, it wasn't even real and I was no fun and blah, blah, blah. I bet they're dead now. So let's go ahead and see our final story. I already went in, did some of her skin, finished up some stuff with the little girl here. I really don't have very much left, which I'm very excited about. I think that this looks pretty ghoulish. But I want to brighten her up just a little bit, so I think the blood is really going to go ahead and bring her out. Let's go ahead and listen to our last story.
Our final story comes to us from Redditor Rune Cat. The whole Bloody Mary game got really popular when I was in 4th grade. All of my friends were daring each other to do it. Of course, none of them could. They all told of how they'd go into the bathroom, turn the light off, and turn it back on and leave. Some tried it with the light on. Some only said it twice or once and then left. Some didn't even have the door closed. No one seemed to be brave enough to try the trick fully. No one, except me, that is. Or at least, that's what I thought in my head. I liked the word brave, and I wanted to be the best at it, and it seemed that I had no competition. As long as I could finish the trick, I won. And so later that night, I put my own courage to the test. I walked into our bathroom and turned off the lights. It was pitch black in the room. I waited a little for my eyes to focus more, and then stared into the mirror. My heart started to race and I gulped. I already got farther than some. All I had to do now was say the name 3 times, wait for a little bit to see if anything would happen, and then I could leave. I took in a breath and held it. Just that name, 3 times. I could do it. I was the bravest, and I'm not allowed to chicken out, I thought. Bloody Mary. Once. Bloody Mary. Twice. I took another breath. Just one more. One more time. I gave a quick glance to where the door was next to me, but I really wanted to be the bravest. So, in a sudden surge of confidence before I lost it and ran out of the room, I looked straight back at the mirror and said her name a 3rd time. Bloody Mary! Now for the waiting part. I just had to wait a minute or so. A minute was 60 seconds. I had better get to counting in my head so I didn't accidentally stand there for too long or too short. 1, 2, 3, and out the door I went. I opened it again, turned on the light, and stared for a bit. And then I turned the light off and left the bathroom with the door fully opened. My heart still racing. I felt bad for not waiting as long as I should have. However, I still technically did everything the way that it was supposed to. And I felt pretty awesome. I calmed myself and said, that wasn't so bad. It wasn't bad yet. I went to bed later that night and snuggled in between my little brother and my mom. This was in a house where my brother and I didn't sleep in our rooms. I always liked sleeping under the blankets, completely under the blankets, and I never dared to look out from underneath them. This changed though that same night, when I woke up in the middle of the night to something climbing on the bed at my feet. I really didn't want to look and see what it was, but it was very slowly trying to climb up closer. So I took a breath and I took a peek and immediately regretted doing so. This is the part where it sounds ridiculous. I don't say that what I saw was corporal in any way, and it very well could have been my imagination deciding to redefine overboard, but what I saw crawling up slowly onto the bed was what my 4th grader mind instantly understood to be a zombie. It was dark, but I could still clearly see and feel the creature. Its movements held weight. Its eyes looked like they were gouged out, and there were only black, rotten holes. Its skin was dead-looking, and in some parts were just raw flesh. Its mouth had disgusting teeth and was just open as if it didn't know how to close. It seemed to have trouble getting on the bed, but finally did, crawling towards me, or rather, my face, and it was already at my feet. There was no smell, no sound, just a disgusting monster as graphic as the horror movies I was never allowed to watch or even be around. It was after I noted its scraggly hair that I looked past it. My heart was beating furiously in my chest, voice caught in my throat, paralyzed in fear. I saw the rest. These things were everywhere. They were in my closet, coming out towards us. They were in the corners of the room, coming towards us. Still, others were in the kitchen, outside the bedroom, outside the door, coming towards us. I immediately screamed as loud and as high-pitched as I could. I furiously began kicking the one on the bed, right in the chest, until it was off of me. They didn't seem very fast or intelligent, hence the zombie comparison. So I decided that I had a chance. I figured my screaming probably woke up my mom and my brother, so they should be able to defend themselves. but I needed to warn the whole neighborhood about the invasion. I started thinking I should run down the street towards my friend's house. Yes, I'm gonna run really, really fast all the way to her house in the middle of the night, and who knows what time it is, bang on her door until it's opened, screaming about a zombie invasion the whole time. I didn't get that far though. As soon as I flew out of bed and made a mad dash for the front door, I felt something grab me around my middle. I kicked furiously until I registered in my mind the sound of my mom's voice over my hysteria. She was asking, "What's going on?" And she flipped on the lights. To me, the light seemed like it was almost slower than instant as it spread across the room, while the creatures fled from it and vanished upon impact. I was sobbing. All I could really spit out was, "There were zombies," in between hysteric crying. Despite how absolutely out of my mind terrified I was, my mom managed to start laughing and gave me a hug. She said that she thought that someone had broken into the house or something. Something definitely not as insane as what I just said. But she told me it was just a horrible bad dream, even though I was awake the entire time. At no point was I actually asleep, except for when I was sleeping before I woke up. So it was more like some hallucination. My own idea is that it was my punishment for cheating. After all, I kind of didn't really do the Bloody Mary trick perfectly. Or else, my own imagination just really hates me. I've never seen anything like that, even on TV, even briefly. So I don't think it could have come from that. Either way, I've never done anything like Bloody Mary ever again.
Wow. I mean, okay, let's talk about zombies. Personally, they've never been my favorite paranormal entity. I mean, I will admit there are some examples of zombies that are done in media that I think are really, really great. For example, on Netflix, there's a Korean zombie thriller series called Kingdom. I highly recommend it. I think that that's awesome, and that's a really, really cool example of a great zombie. But in the most part, I never really cared for them. So, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't actually a zombie. Clearly, he summoned something out of a portal. And I don't exactly know what that was. All I know is that clearly it wanted to eat his face. I mean, I don't know if I would have preferred that or this. Hard to say. But what I will say is that I think it's very interesting that it seems that he's not the only person to have witnessed a paranormal phenomenon directly after doing Bloody Mary. It seems that a lot of these stories say the same exact thing, and I think that that's the most interesting part of this tale. Well, Ghosts and Ghoulies, that's it. This is our Bloody Mary. I know she's a little dark and a little spooky, but I am all about her. She can stay. I thank you so, so much for continuing to support our show and continuing to watch and getting all nice and creeped out with me. Please, please, please take it upon yourself to please like this video, comment, as well as subscribe so that you don't miss out on any of the awesome spooky fun. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. If you ran into Bloody Mary or you did it yourself, I want to hear from you. Go ahead and email us at conjuringcanvases@gmail.com. Remember the rules of conjuring, ghosties and ghoulies. Never play alone, never play in a graveyard, and always say goodbye. Goodbye, ghosties and ghoulies.